Good evening. Welcome to Silver Slumbers. We have a special guest in tonight's video. His name is Interscare Sleep. So he's going to be reading stories with me to help you get those soothing Z's that you deserve. By the end of the video or while listening, you should check out his channel as well. So sit back, relax, and close his eyes. And remember, don't get lost in the dark. Warning, some of these stories contain graphic content. Viewers' discretion is advised. Someone suggested that I share my weird encounter with this group. I know fiction is allowed, but I assure you that my first encounter is not that. I kind of wish that it would just be much easier to accept, but this isn't the case. My encounter happened in February of 2007. I used to work third shift at a paper stock factory warehouse. The main day shift supervisor was on vacation, so our boss on night shift decided that she wanted to leave early. So she just let us sneak off about 2 hours earlier than our normal shift end time. This would be between 4:30 through 5 in the morning. I was following a coworker down this country road. As the warehouse was on the outskirts of a small rural town, I noticed he hit his brake lights and proceeded to swerve off the road. I'm probably like 1,000 feet behind him, and I'm thinking to myself, the heck is this guy doing? And that's when I saw it. It was a tall, dark shape strolling down the middle of the road in a hunch over and swaying side to side sort of manner. I have likened it how one of those tall windblower figures you see swaying at a car dealership or something like that moved. Very unnatural movements. I can't do it justice by describing it, as it would only really make sense if someone saw it themselves. It looked like a really tall person wrapped in large, dark blanket or cloak. I had to hit the brakes and swerve too, but I came to a full stop. Whatever it was, I couldn't make out any features or characteristics. I saw a large torso with 2 legs. The upper half was hunched forward, as it was leaning like an older person would with a walker. Now, at the time, I was driving a 1998 Ford Explorer, and I would have looked at the height of the vehicle, and it lists around maybe 67 inches, but whatever walked past my driver's window was a very good foot tall and higher than my vehicle, especially when it's leaned forward. So I believe whatever was walking around 10 feet tall minimum. Again, I could not see a head, any arms, just a figure with legs walking. My taillights illuminated as I started to drive past it. I couldn't make out any defined details for the body. I didn't see fur, skin, or anything like clothing. It was solid, not like a translucent type of thing. It was just large, thick, and black, or at the very least, dark gray in color. My coworker had to pull me into the parking lot a little ways down the road. I followed him in, and I could tell you that he was scared. He was saying something along the line of, "What was that? It didn't have a head." Among of a lot of other things most panicked people said. We decided to drive back down to try to see if it was still there and what it actually is. I drove in front and he followed behind. We come up to the general area and I noticed that there's a large black animal laying in the middle of the road. It appeared to be a large black dog. Part of me knew that this wouldn't be large enough to be what I was talking about in the road, but we had to stop because it was directly in the middle of the roadway. I decided to get out and walk up to it. All the while, my coworker was yelling at me to get back into my vehicle. As I approached to whatever was laying on the road, it begins to head up and look at me. The eyes were glowing yellow, which I write off was eyes shine from the headlights, but it growls at me, so I stop dead in my tracks and just watch. The thing stood up in his back legs, like a person, but falls back down. It sits back up and hobbles off to the side of the road like a wounded animal that wasn't able to use his front legs. It looked like your typical German Shepherd or wolf type face, but his fur was puffy like a chow dog. It was a lot bigger than most dogs, but still, nowhere as tall as whatever it was walking down the road. I didn't see any blood or wounds, so I can't say if it was actually hurt or so. My coworker got out of the car by this point after it disappeared into the wood line. We discussed what the heck just happened, but while we were talking, I noticed next to our feet was a mouse. It was just standing there with us, but it was just getting itself cleaned up. I nudged it with my shoe and it just kept on cleaning its face as if it wasn't afraid of us. The mouse was sitting upright in a position, as in its hind legs, and using its front paws to wipe itself. I never really considered it until recently that all three of these bizarre happenings was all on two legs. We got back into the vehicles and drove off. Then the next time at work, I had to mention what happened to our coworkers, and they just laughed at us. So the other guy who saw it with me said that if I don't stop talking about it, he's just gonna deny it. It's just best that I just forget about it. So for essentially 15 years, I never told anyone until recently. I've tried to rationalize it into something that makes sense, but even then, it doesn't completely add up. I have tried to explain it as many ways as I can say, like saying that it was just a large dog that must have been hit by a car before my coworker got there. Maybe it was just messing around with the mouse, and it got hit by the vehicle, which broke its front two legs, so that's why I was trying to use its back legs. The mouse was traumatized from the dog trying to mess with it, so it was just standing there, cleaning the dog slobber off itself. That sounds at least plausible until the original thing that we saw walking around without a head. The dog was nowhere as tall as that was, so even the dog standing upright, it was close as 6 foot roughly. But whatever was walking had to been at least 7 foot tall, as it was so much more taller than my Explorer, even with it hunched forward. I can explain away the dog and mouse, but I just can't explain what that was. So I'm back at square one, trying to understand what it could possibly have been. As someone who's always been skeptical, it becomes very hard to accept the unacceptable. I've always been interested in weird creatures and such, but I never truly believed that it existed. I still struggle to believe that all these crazy stories could be true. And yet, who am I to say that they aren't, especially with the weird crap that my former coworker and I went through that night? All I know is that whatever I saw is something that I don't know and probably never will. It sounds crazy, and I personally would be hesitant to believe it if someone else told me that this happened to them. But that's what happened.
To understand my story, you sort of have to know a tiny bit about trespassing laws in our country, in that we don't have any so long as you're respectful and non-destructive. We can walk over any hills you like, and in my case, camp on any beach of your choosing, so long as once you leave the area, it's how you found it. I used to love camping when I was little. Our family would go multiple times a year with a large group of my parents' friends and their kids. On average, there were maybe 10 of us at a time, which was a bit of a logistical challenge, since we always headed out to this one really remote beach on the coast. Actually, we weren't the only ones. There's always yachts just bobbing off the short pier with people in them and other campers lining up and down the beach. Most of them also had children and teenagers, so it wasn't a wild party scene. It was very much an informal family holiday spot. There was even a small building with toilets and showers installed nearby, even though this was the middle of nowhere. I guess the local council must have figured it out and got sick of people peeing behind bushes. We took a trip up in spring 2011. I'm really bad with time, but I know this because I got my dog in winter of 2010. After picking her out that November from the shelter as a birthday gift from me to me, as I paid her adoption fee. Reddit, I know you love dogs, and she will be very important to the story later on, so let me tell you a bit about Parmesan. Parmesan came to me as a 6-month-old puppy who had been rescued from a dogfighting situation. We're not entirely sure what breed she is exactly, but my best guess is a Lurcher Staffy mix. She's a wonderfully well-tempered dog with people, and most dogs, but you absolutely do not threaten her. She'll have you. So, by the time of this camping trip, I'd had Parmesan for a few months. She'd never come camping with us before, but far as my family are concerned, dogs go on camping trips. So, we all piled into the car and she came too. Unusually though, none of my family friends could make it, so it was only me, my sister, my dad, and my mom. I didn't mind. I wasn't that attached to the other kids. I'd rather play with my dog and I'd still have my sister. The drive took the best part of 6 hours, and because we'd left a bit later, although I don't remember why we'd left later than normal, we arrived at sunset. Not a good time to be building a tent, but we'd expected to arrive to other campers already set up on the beach illuminated in campfires. The beach was empty. In spite of this, my parents started taking stuff out and trying to build a tent. They asked us to fetch some of the lighter bags from the boot of the car while they sat pointing a flashlight at the sand to see properly. I rolled down the window of the car for Parmesan before getting out. It was pretty hot for that time of year and I wanted her to have some air. Always got to be looking out for my furry little homie. As we're fumbling about in the dark on a beach, in the middle of nowhere, it's pretty spooky. The one road that led to this beach was circular and had a bridge over the water, meaning you could basically circle around the beach like a big zero shape if you felt like it. I wasn't really paying attention to the road. I was more complaining that I was tired, as kids do. After maybe 15 minutes of my dad trying to nail the tent into the sand, my mom's asking him, had he seen that car drive around? It's been a few times. My dad kind of shrugged her off. He's sort of like that. I don't know if he said anything back to her, but after a few more minutes, a car pulled up next to ours on the road and someone got out. It was maybe 15 or 20 feet from the cars to where we were, and the light was pretty low, except for the torches. We weren't expecting to see anyone else out here at this point, and I think my mom said, it must be the security. I don't know why a random beach would have security. I think what she meant was the wildlife trust or something, as they do occasionally come down to do their nosy. The guy was walking pretty unevenly. He must have been drunk or high because he had that stagger to him. There was absolutely no way this guy was sober. Cool. A junkie. Not an unusual find, but it's rare to see them in the wild. As he walked into the flashlight range, we realized he was carrying a large knife, probably about 15 inches, although I was small at the time, so maybe my sense of scale was off. I don't like my dad, but credit to him, because once he saw this man, he got up immediately, holding onto the camping mallet, and put us all behind him. The man began to shout wildly at us that we can't camp here and he was just letting us know. My dad tried to initially be a bit low-key with the guy and told him that this was fine. We'd leave, but this didn't work. He kept coming closer to us, so my dad started shouting, and the man kept shouting back. My sister and I were crying. I remember shaking. I was utterly terrified, as I'm sure anyone would be in that situation. It really did seem like this guy and my dad were gonna fight, and I'm gonna be honest, I didn't fancy my dad's chances. While it's grim to consider, I'm absolutely convinced he would have killed my dad and possibly us as well once he was done, as I don't think my mother would have had the common sense to run with us. I love her, but she's always put Dad and her relationship with him above us. This isn't how it went down. A bolt from the black like a wolf descending upon its prey took us all by surprise. Most of all, the man with the knife. In that moment, Parmesan was the apex predator large canines represent in nature. She got him good by the arm and clamped down hard, ripping his jacket and shredding the skin underneath. He dropped the knife, as it had been in the arm that she had got him by. He kicked her. He punched her and eventually got her off. He grabbed the knife from the sand and ran back to his car and drove off. Parmesan didn't follow him. She stayed with us, muzzle covered in blood. Quickly as we gathered our things and all got back in the car, all pretty shook up by the incident, I looked Parmy over. She was okay, but the car's window was much more open than I'd left it. We think what happened was when the shouting started, she must have put her paws up on the gap I'd left for her. As it was an old car and had the rolly down windows and not an electric button, we think she must have been able to hit it with her paws to force it down enough to squeeze out. This is not the end of my story. We're all pretty scared, and since we had the dog with us, we couldn't book it into a hotel for a night. My parents decided just to drive us home, so we could all feel safe. But first had to drive into the nearest town for gas, as they were kind of low. I spent the time trying to clean Parmesan up a little. I'd always loved dogs, but what she'd just done for me blew my mind. As we drove into town, we came across a petrol station, but it looked closed. My dad drove up closer to get a better look, and stuck his head out the window to get a better look at the sign. My mom asked him what on earth he was doing, and he told her he was trying to see when it opens. Never. My heart sank. Parked in the corner behind a van, so we hadn't seen him at first, was the man with the knife. He was sitting in the boot of his car, using some tissue paper to clean up his arm. It looked pretty bad. Without stopping to refuel or look anywhere else in town, my dad drove right out of there. He decided to go to the next town over, but this was removed. The next town over was 60 miles away. He didn't have that much gas, we realized, as we began driving. We were going to break down. That's fine, Dad said. We had AAA coverage. They'd come tow us home, or at least to somewhere acceptable for the night. It's better than staying in the last town. After driving for maybe 5 minutes, lights flash us from behind. Another car. The same car the man had been driving. It was him, following us. He must have realized we were low on gas. The next half hour was one of the worst half hours of my life. I had a complete and utter breakdown, as did everyone really. I could tell my parents were trying to keep it under wraps, so it wouldn't upset us, but we weren't really little kids. We were both double digits. We knew how dangerous this situation was. Dad turned off the radio to conserve petrol, and the man followed us for about 55 miles before he peeled away onto another road. Our fuel meter was on the big red E for empty for the last 10 miles. We were driving on fumes. I didn't really believe in God, but if he does exist, that was definitely one of his miracles. Once we got there, he drove into a petrol station and refilled to a full tank before driving the rest of the way home. Sister and I slept in the car after that. I only woke up once we made it all the way home, just grateful nothing worse had happened than that. After getting some sleep, my mom phoned the non-emergency line for the police and reported what had happened. They never got back to her after that, but apparently the woman she spoke to said they may wish to in the future, as he matched the description given of a suspect wanted in relation to a murder charge. No idea if he was actually the guy or just a random psycho. As I said, they never got back to her. So what's the takeaway then? Other than crazy man on the beach, let's not meet. Well, for me, it's that I love Parmesan. She's still with us now. Old as the hills and twice as grizzled as one of my mom's friends likes to joke. I don't know why she did what she did that day. I couldn't tell you what her thought process was. What I do know is that this poor puppy was born into an environment where they abused and neglected her, only to be rescued and taken to a shelter where her mother and siblings all found homes for her. Despite how badly people treated her, when I took her home, she forgave but never forgot. I think the saying is, I never trust a person who doesn't like a dog, but I always trust a dog when they don't like a person. They have a very good understanding of human body language, and I think she must have understood how much danger we were in. If you're able to, please adopt. You might find yourself in a good situation like mine one day. I promise you, if you're willing to save a four-legged friend's life, they'll pay you back tenfold if they're able to, without a thought for their own safety. I paid €78 for Parmesan's adoption fee, which is a lot when you're a kid, but it chills me to my bones knowing that if I hadn't been so insistent on my dog, I might be dead.
It was September in central Idaho. Autumn had come to the mountains, and with it, bow hunters looking for mountain goats. My cousin, let's call him Vern, is an avid hunter. He had been all over North America, hunting various game: bears in Alaska, wild hogs in Texas, bighorn sheep in Wyoming. His favorite hunting area was in Lemmy Mountain Range in central Idaho. Our extended family had been hunting in those mountains for generations. We know every river bottom and mountain peak like many people know their own neighborhoods. Mountain goats are fascinating animals to hunt. They live well above the tree line in rocky environments. They are sure-footed and can climb near vertical slopes. Hunting these animals require to venture into these dangerous areas. You have to be mindful as you pursue an animal like that one. One wrong step on the rocky slope or one loose rock can mean you're going to never be home again. Vern was a mountain expert hunter. It's something he was born to do. Vern decided to hunt in the Hayden River area of the Lemmis. It's a familiar spot to most locals, and the area is home to plenty of mountain goats. The first mile of Vern's hike was uneventful as he climbed up the canyon. The air was crisp, and his breath formed in great plums as he progressed. The sun was just peeking over the mountain when Vern came to the small deer trail. He decided it might be a nice shortcut from his usual route and took it. A few hundred feet up into the trail, he saw something odd popped out from behind a tree. It was a man. He was dressed in a light denim coat and jeans and was carrying a small backpack. My cousin stopped for a second to get his bearings. Unsure of where this guy came from, the man waved at him with both arms, one of them holding an older style hunting bow. Acknowledging him, Vern waved back. Although the man looked to be physically fine, it was clear that he was emotionally distressed. He yelled out something to my cousin. I couldn't quite hear him and waved his arm, indicating my cousin should follow him. Vern didn't get any bad vibes from this man and could tell that he was genuinely in need of some kind of help. He began to make his way up to the canyon. Following this mysterious man, Vern can never gain any ground on this guy. He was always just far enough away that he couldn't talk to him. Periodically, the man would stop, run towards him to make sure Vern was still following. Every time he looked back, Vern could see the worry in his face. My cousin did his best to remain calm and kept a smile on his face. Unsure who or what was being led to, it was peculiar, Vern thought as he hiked. He hadn't seen other vehicles on his drive up to the trailhead. Perhaps he came in from the other side of the ridge? What could he possibly be leading him to? He figured one of his hunting parties had been hurt or needed some kind of help. Of course, he wouldn't have to speculate if the man would just stop and talk to him for 5 minutes or so. Vern lost sight of the guy just past a turn into the trail. The trail opened up into a incredibly steep, rocky talus slope. He looked in every direction and still couldn't locate this man when he heard a whistle. Looking up, he saw a guy about 500 feet in the rocky slope waving at him. There was no possible way that he had gone up there that far in just short time. Vern lost sight of him. He still didn't feel any fear or wariness about this weird situation. The man was waving more frantically now, practically begging Vern to follow him up the slope. With a sigh and a grunt, he started up in the rocks. It was going slow. Every step caused a mini rock slide. It would cause him to continuously lose his footing, huffing and puffing on the cold, thin air. my cousin eventually made it to the small landing. It had taken him almost 45 minutes to get up to the spot where he saw the man from below. There was no earthly way anyone could gun down that hill any faster. Totally exhausted and out of breath, Vern sat down on the stone landing. He looked around and couldn't see the man anywhere. As he scanned his surroundings, he saw something odd poking out of the boulder about 20 feet away from him. Walking over to it, he found a weathered boot. 2 boots, actually. Inside those boots, and under the boulder as well, were bones. Vern looked around once again for the man, but he never saw him again. Instead of feeling eerie or unnerving, Vern felt a sense of relief wash over him. These emotions weren't his own. What he felt seemed to come off all around him. He marked a spot with his GPS and decided to make his way down and call the authorities. The Lemhi County Sheriff's Office responded, and he led up into the canyon to the body. It took 4 grown men to push the boulder out of the way, and when they did, they found the skeletonized remains of a man. On the body, they found hunting equipment and some personal effects. From a credit card in the wallet, they were able to identify the man. He was a bow hunter that had gone missing almost exactly 53 years ago. Vern never wanted to be identified to the public or the missing bow hunter's family. He didn't want recognition for something like that. To him, it was just one of those bizarre mountain stories. He was happy that the family got closure, even if it was half a century later. The only thing that bothered him was the man leading him up to the canyon. And with this strange and sudden disappearance, he had mentioned the waving man to the sheriff, but was brushed off. When news reports came out announcing the discovery, several photos of the man were published. Vern was absolutely shocked when he saw them. In the photos was the man he saw leading up to the mountain to the body. It finally made sense to him. The man's distressful look, the constant checking if Vern was following him, the sense of relief he felt when the body was discovered. That man was desperate to get home. And through Vern, he was able to reunite with his family.
Let me start off by saying this is my first post on this subreddit, so if I messed anything up, please tell me and I'll fix it. Also, for reference, I was a 19-year-old female at the time. Still female, of course, just a little older. I love camping. Anytime my friends and I came home from college, we would load up our cooler with the beer, grab some gear, and go screw around outside. Unfortunately, when I was actually at school, none of my sorority sisters or other friends ever wanted to go with me, so I would often suffer withdrawals from camping. One day, the weather was way too nice to waste, so I grabbed some of my gear, hopped in a car that I borrowed from a buddy, and drove to a spot that was secluded, yet within a safe distance to civilization that I could run and get help. Camping also creeps me out sometimes, but that creepy feeling is also somewhat of a plus for me. It's the same reason that people read these stories. It's fun to be scared. So, I make a little camp and get a fire going. I hadn't brought all that much to eat, but I was enjoying myself, reading and looking around the area, that sort of thing. I got the feeling I was being watched, and I stopped dead in my tracks. I hear a twig crunch over to my right. Then I see a doe bolt from 100 feet or so in front of me. I laughed at myself and went back to camp, with the armful of wood that I had gathered. I kept freaking myself out, hearing sounds just outside the ring of light cast by the fire. I always get inside my own head, so I shrugged it off and kept whittling at the stick that I had been messing with. Around 1, I decided to go into my tent and snuff out the lantern. I had been slamming beers in the most unladylike fashion and smoking cheap cigars. Another reason I like camping. I can act however I want. So I passed out relatively quick. At about 2 a.m., I start hearing footsteps. They sound pretty light and sort of timid. I think to myself that it's just a deer or some other animal, More likely a raccoon because I had probably left some food out. I'm still on guard though. About 30 minutes of sleeping with one eye open, I hear a rubbing noise, and the tent fabric is being pushed in a bit. I don't know how I didn't crap my sleeping bag, but I just sat there paralyzed with my K-bar in my hand. I desperately wanted to thrust the knife through the tent fabric, but I was still holding out hope that it was just some of my buddies from a frat joking with me. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, it all stopped. I was starting to feel slightly more secure, because daylight would be coming in about 2 or 3 hours, but I sure as shit wasn't going to sleep. All of a sudden, at about 4 o'clock, I realized I should put my boots on, so that if anything did happen, I would be ready. After having stayed up and keeping alert a little while longer, my friend's car alarm goes blaring. I freak out and run out of the tent. I go about 2 steps before something grabs me around the mouth. I open my mouth to scream, but instead the person's pinky finger slips between my teeth. I've heard that people can perform superhuman feats when they have huge adrenaline rushes. In my case, I just clamped down, and there's no way to say this without sounding ridiculous. His finger popped off. He screamed, pulled his hand away with the missing digit falling to the ground. He took off running down the hill that I was camping on. I took off right quick in the opposite direction. I must have looked ridiculous to the people whose house I ran to. A little sorority girl in a white beater, boxers, and steel-toe boots. I also had some blood that had oozed out of my lip, not from the finger, but because I had also managed to take a pretty good chunk out of my lip as well. I told them what had happened. They called the police and got me some real clothing, and the man at the house made me a whiskey and coke. When the cops got there, they checked it out. The cops went to check it out, and when they came back, it was light out. They brought me back so I could get my friend's car. What I saw inside just made me more scared. Right next to the tent was a red gas can. He could have just lit me on fire earlier. The finger was also gone, suggesting that he had come back. The kicker is that they never caught the guy. So somewhere out there, a man is sitting down to dinner, maybe alone, maybe with a wife and a couple of kids, and he's missing his right pinky.
The Okefenokee Swamp is located mostly in southern Georgia and is partly in North Florida. I've been going there since I was a kid. My dad and uncle were avid outdoorsmen. They were always canoeing, hiking, hunting, fishing, etc. And I grew up learning to love the same things. Now, if the first thing that came to your mind was swamp, alligators, you would be correct. And the Okefenokee has become the biggest around. It may sound super scary to non-Southerners, but the old saying really is true. If you leave them alone, they will leave you alone. Canoeing always comes across the dark, tea-color waters. If you pass them too closely to one, it will quietly sink into the murky depths. He's not coming to get you. You've simply interrupted his sunbathing. As elementary school kids in southern Georgia, it was kind of a rite of passage to go to the Okefenokee field trip and to be led on a tour guide by Okefenokee Joe. Joe was a true outdoorsman, extremely knowledgeable, friendly, good with kids, and funny. A little strange, but generally regarded as a good guy, a local legend. He would get that boat closer to the big gators than my dad ever let me get. He taught us kids all about them. We even got to hear about the mating call of some of the males and watch a lot of their behavior up close. He would also show us all the birds, snakes, and other wildlife. The swamp's residents were so used to Joe's boat that they didn't flee when he got close. Great memories. Anyhow, fast forward to my adulthood. I still have a great love for the outdoors. I've recently gotten married and successfully getting my wife and stepdaughter into kayaking, camping, and hiking. I broke them into fairly easily. Calm lakes and beautiful, crystal clear blue springs fed Florida waterways. We'd encountered some gators, but the girls had already become comfortable with the fact that they didn't want to hurt humans. I decided it was time to go to the Ophikanoki and show them my childhood swamp stomping grounds. We headed out one weekend, kinda on a whim. I had called ahead to reserve a campsite because I assumed that it wouldn't be that busy. Well, I was wrong. Every tent camping site was booked. I was pretty visibly bummed out, so I guess the ranger felt sorry for me. She told us to hold on. She was going to check one more thing. When she came back, she had great news. There was a primitive group site available. If you aren't familiar, these are larger sites that are usually for bigger groups like Boy Scouts, usually situated away from the main campgrounds areas. They do not have any electricity. We camp 100% primitive all the time, so this wasn't an issue for us at all. The ranger explained that this particular group site had been closed for 2 seasons due to the road being washed out. She said that they just fixed the road the week before, but hadn't got around to relisted the site as available. She offered to sell it to us for a normal fee instead of the group fee. Deal. We paid, and she vaguely showed us on the map how to get to our home for the night. I remember thinking, damn, that's far. That's hell from the other sites. It's gonna be nice and quiet. Perfect. While at the office, we learned that evening there was going to be a ranger guided night paddle. This particular part inside the Ophikanoki is designated Dark Sky Park, meaning there is very little light pollution. I was already excited about showing my family the stars and Milky Way. So getting out onto the water at night and seeing the skies, that just sounded very sweet. We decided to sign up for the night paddle, then headed off to find our campsite. When we got there, you can tell right away that the area had not been used in several years. Overgrown, spider webs everywhere, teeming with the usual wildlife. I kind of preferred things this way, so I did not think twice about it. It was so far from the campgrounds and the main office area. You couldn't hear a single sound of humans or vehicles. The area was large, so I walked around a bit to find a good spot to set up. I looked back at my map to try to find and gauge exactly how this little island was shaped, and noticed that I was seeing and what the map shown didn't quite line up. Whatever, I'm probably just reading it wrong. We set up our camp and just enjoyed the sunshine and the sound of nature. It was still very early spring, so the hordes of mosquitoes and various swamp bugs weren't out in full force yet. The bugs in the swamp in the summer months could be a horror story for their own. Around 7:30 p.m., we loaded the kayaks back to my pickup and headed all the way to the park to the launch area, as our guided paddle was to start at 8 o'clock. We approached the launch site to unload, and there was a good 15-20 other people going to paddle, led by a young, enthusiastic ranger. We all slipped into the water on our headlamps on the red light setting. We exited the small canal we had been traveling in and submerged into the large river-type waterway that meandered through the swamp. As we slowly and quietly creeped along, the trees damped with Spanish moss loomed over us on both sides, with the dramatic orange and pink sunset as their backdrop. The sun finally began disappearing, and the stars started to come out. It was absolutely stunning, and still one of my favorite kayak memories I ever remembered. I've never actually seen the Milky Way like that before. It was the new moon night, dark as it could ever be. About a mile from the original launch, we all congregate out into the middle of the wide waterway and sat completely still and quiet. The motionless dark waters of the swamp reflected the skies like a mirror. Thousands of stars and galaxies twinkled above us and below us. It was like being in space. Shooting stars were visible every minute. It was really magical. The only artificial light in the sky was a dull glow of Jacksonville, Florida, on the horizon, which was 100 miles to our southeast. After a while, the ranger snapped us out of our trances. It was time to head back. When we were paddling out there, it had been dusk, twilight for most of the trip. Not much light, but enough to kind of silhouette the trees and branches against the sky, and a slight glimmer on the water. By now, it was pitch black, and I do mean pitch black. The ranger told us to switch our headlamps back on to the normal white light setting so that we can all see well enough to navigate out of the swamp. As each headlamp slowly switched on and the swamp was illuminated, we were met with hundreds of glowing eyes. Hundreds, I swear to you. Now, as I said earlier, I grew up out here. Gators were nothing new or scary to me at all. However, growing up, we never really stayed out of the water past dark. We would shine our lights out over the water to see at all the eyes, but from the dry land, far away from the beast. Now, I found myself and my little family quite literally pushing past floating gators with our kayaks. They were absolutely everywhere, all over the sides of the channels, as well as blocking our way to the center. The ranger was leading and assured everyone to not worry. He paddled up towards a huge group of shiny eyes ahead of us and pushed right through them. Most of the eyes just disappeared under the water, but the gator directly in the ranger's path thrashed and its tail actually hit the kayak. Holy crap, y'all. Sharp gasp from the entire group pierced the otherwise quiet southern night air, but the ranger showed zero signs of panic, which was reassuring. We all just trusted the young man that we weren't going to royally pee ourselves out of these things by kayaking straight into them. As we went along, the sounds of the gators being bumped by kayaks and thrashing were heard every couple minutes. There weren't any other jarring sounds or movements, just the constant calling of frogs, cicadas, and the splashing of disturbed dinosaurs. When we finally turned back into the small channel that led to the launch, there were no more glowing eyes. I'd be lying if I said that I haven't been a bit freaked out, but I can honestly say that I wasn't panicking. The ranger being so cool and confident while leading the way made it pretty easy to calm down. Everyone started to relax again as we neared the launch. We got out, loaded our boats, and one by one headed back to our camps. There was a line of red taillights trailing off towards the main campground, while my wife, daughter, and myself split off alone into the darkness towards the other side of the park where our sights was. I do remember that feeling of eerie, but everyone had made it through the gator gauntlet safely with no problems. Now, we were laughing about it and remarking on how cool the whole experience was. We were in the high spirits, no stress. We had no idea of the terror that would come later in the night. We finally got back to our campsite around midnight and we were starving. I got a nice fire going while my wife prepped dinner. The meal finished cooking around 1 a.m. and we finally all settled down to get comfy by the fire and eat. I had to take 2 bites of my food when the horrifying experience began. The cicadas and frogs were singing, but you tend to drown out into the background noise because it's so consistent. Suddenly, out of the calming buzz of their singing, sprung a sound that I will never forget. A low, rumbling, guttural growl, long deep, vibrating into our chest. We all froze and looked at each other like, did you all hear that? Not even 10 seconds later, we heard it again. Yes, we all definitely effing heard that crap. It sounded close, like really close. Like right on the other side of the brush we were camped near. The only thing I could honestly relate it to at the time was the growling sound of the T-Rex made in Jurassic Park. I was terrified. I've been scared in the woods, in the swamps. I've been seeing swamp gas, freaky figures. I heard screams. I've been in the Marine Corps. I've encountered bears in the Appalachian Mountains. I've explored all experience of all kinds of places. When I tell you that I've never been this scared, I mean it. Pure, raw, primitive fear. I immediately told the girls to get into the cab of my pickup. They got into the truck, and I hopped onto the bed of the truck with my little .357 Magnum drawn. I figured being back there would have helped me get off the ground and give me a little bit of an advantage over whatever was coming. I told the girls to lock the doors and only open the sliding back door so we can communicate. I start frantically shining my flashlight around, aiming my gun along with it. I see absolutely nothing but pitch blackness, an empty space of trees and grass. We continue to hear the growling coming from one general direction, not getting any softer or louder, just continuously emitting in 3-5 seconds long intervals. Every 30 seconds or so, it was coming from the brush right next to our site. I shine my light all over that area, but I see nothing, just thick leaves, underbrush, and pine. No movement whatsoever. Then suddenly, we heard the sound coming from the complete opposite direction, more towards the open area of our site. I whip around and shine my light that way, and that's when I noticed the dense fog that had settled onto the entire area. It was a damp, sticky, suffocating fog. Almost right away, the growling sound was coming back from the original direction. I whip around, but immediately I hear it again, behind me. That's when I realized that there were two of them doing some kind of call and answer with each other. There was also when I realized that there was another sound of the swamp, and it has gone silent. Nothing but the call and answer of whatever was making these absolutely gut-wrenching sounds. It got absolutely quiet for a moment. Nothing but the heavy fog, which seemed to have a silent sound of its own. My wife, with shaking, trembling voice, told me that she wanted to leave immediately and that our daughter agreed. Now I was absolutely terrified. Do not misunderstand this. However, the thought of just leaving all of my expensive gear behind was somehow more offensive. Not to mention that I was getting kind of frustrated. I'm at home in this forsaken swamp. I know all the creatures here. I feel comfortable here. It's borderline upsetting me that something out there that has me so scared and confused. I'm starting to try to rationalize what it could be, whatever it is that's making that sound. Suddenly, it started back up again, and now it sounds like there could be 4 or 6 of them, all growling back and forth of each other and to each other, overlapping their sounds from each other now. Coming from all sides, a demonic chorus of deep, rattling, soul-sucking rumbles. Now getting any closer or farther away, just keeping us closely surrounded. I keep myself at least somewhat cool by affirming that it must be animals of some kind. I wouldn't even entertain a thought of supernatural or cryptic. It's not that I don't believe in that stuff. I do. I was just trying not to freak out. My wife kept saying that it sounded like a big cat. And while I do agree, I knew that it wasn't. It would have had been a massive lion or tigers that would have made that extremely low, rumbling growl. It's impossible. I racked my brain for the biggest animal that it could be, and I just kept landing on alligator. Yet, we had just paddled directly through the entire swamp of them. Some of them were absolutely massive, and they hadn't made a single sound the entire time we were out there in the water. No, that couldn't be it. I even had the thought that the young, playful ranger had orchestrated some kind of sick joke on us poor campers out here alone. Really and truly, I had no effing idea what it was. And not being able to even see a glimpse of what it could be so I could take a shot at it to protect my family was just a very helpless feeling. I really wish I had more words to let you understand on how I felt. Just blindly standing in the back of my truck, hearing what I can only imagine were the scariest, most evilest, the most vile things on the planet, just knowing that they wanted to kill, eat, or otherwise mutilate myself and my family. It felt like an eternity, but we probably only had been held up in my truck for about 10 to 15 minutes by now. It had finally gone quiet again, and I told the girls that we could leave. But I'm not leaving the gear. I climbed into the cab and started the truck and moved it, positioning it to where I could shine the headlights onto our stuff while I pack it all up. Gun in hand, I began rolling up the tent, gathering all of our crap and throwing it into the bed of the truck, praying nothing crazy happened, like my truck dying or some other perfectly timed cinematic horror moment. I try to put on a confident air so as to not scare my family. But in my head, I felt so effing vulnerable, like I was some prey. The growling still hadn't come back, but honestly, the silence was scaring me even more out there than anything else. In the fog, I'll never forget the oppressive that fog felt. All of our gear was sopping wet with it. And I swear it was the hardest time to breathe the air. The fire was nothing but the smolder despite the fact that it had been roaring and bright 20 minutes ago. Just as I was rolling up the very last sleeping mat, one final, closer than before, growl shook me to my core. I snatched that mat up and took off running, getting to the truck dukes of hazard styles and taking the F off. None of us looked back. In the comments, I will link a video of what the sound sounded like on YouTube later the night coming back at home when I had cell service again. So now that you've seen the video, you all know what the sound actually sounds like. They were actually large male alligators. That sound is their mating call. The louder, lower, and scarier sounding, the more the female gators will find it attractive. Those must have been the swamp's sexiest alligators, because I've never heard this sound in all my life. I had been under the impression that I knew what their mating call sounded like from my childhood experience in Okefenokee, Joe's boat. And with my father and uncle, these gators must have been absolutely massive to produce the sounds from what we were hearing. Because it was nothing like what I've ever heard in that swamp. It was exactly like the video, but I'm telling you, in person, you can physically feel it rattling inside you. Though I was somewhat comforted by the fact that the noise were just gators flirting, and they weren't just being aggressive towards us, my wife, my daughter. Still, think that we were in danger because we were so close. I'm still not sure about the part. I got into Google Maps and I tried to figure out exactly where we were camped, because from looking at the map the ranger had given us, we shouldn't have been that close to the water. Never could quite figure out where we ended up at, but I just don't know if we were being in the wrong place or the fact that the area had been in human activity for 2 years. Or a combination of both that put us so close to it all mating activities. Either way, it made for a heart-pounding experience that we still talk about this day. Also, as a funny, small addition to the story, looking back, the most hilarious thing was that my daughter was eating corn on the cob at the time, and we heard the first sounds. It was still in her hands. So this entire event, being terrified and hearing these growls, she had a corn or cob in her hand and still eating it. I hope this wasn't too long. I enjoy writing and I just wanted to really set the tone and the events of the night. I also hope my story wasn't a disappointment to the readers here, considering that the ending was a defiant answer, and it was nothing really all that creepy after all. I can assure you, though, that the fear and adrenaline in the moment were very, very real. Imagine hearing that sound in the pitch black of the Okefenokee swamp and not knowing what it was. Looking back, I suppose the fog setting in on us in the exact moment of the growling started was just pure coincidence, but it sure made the whole thing that much scarier. I will never forget the particular kind of fear I've experienced that night. I hope you enjoyed these true creepy backstories, Volume 3. If you made it this far, I want to thank you for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed these stories. Please consider subscribing, as you'd be helping me reach 1,000 subscribers by the end of the year. If you are asleep, well, maybe you can hear me in your dream world. Keep dreaming, as it's the only time we can escape reality. And I'll let you listen to the sound. Enjoy the slumber world.